This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
Dads in their late 30s and early 40s, like me, take much care to bore their children on the art of the mixtape, of recording songs off the radio chart show onto cassette, of flicking through the radio times at Christmas and setting the timer on the VCR to tape the latest James Bond or Mr. Bean premiere on the BBC. This nostalgia has become a kind of social media cliché. But when you think deeply about the technological revolution of which we're really only at the start, the pace of change and the rejection of analogue curation is stark. Lives in the 21st century are now so integrated with the infrastructure of streaming technology and content that's everything everywhere all at once that we've forgotten to question it. The variety, volume and speed of everything from media to research, entertainment to sport, stock markets to multi-stakeholder conferences and 7 different simultaneous time zones is constantly pushing the envelope of more, bigger and faster. So who's in charge of this? Consumers, producers, regulators, broadcasters, entrepreneurs? As organisations start to model more and more the possibilities of the cloud, of the multiverse, and of generative AI language bots that know what you're asking of them before you've finished asking it, who is checking that the impact it has, albeit transformational, is overall good? In this episode of the Possibility Club, Practical Bravery, we're exploring the potential of streaming in real time, where humans around the world can share instantaneous experiences without fear of lag or buffering, and the types of organisations leading the way in pushing this as far as it can go. We also explore what this Pandora's box might mean if we're only figuring out the dangers after the event. My special guest is one of the UK's streaming experts, building some of the fastest and most reliable technology platforms in responsive advertising, on-demand multimedia, live sports and much more. These are platforms that require no broadcasters, no cable TV, no satellite dish, and they're changing the paradigm of how and where people lean into hyper-fast connectivity. Recently appointed the General Manager in Europe, Middle East and Africa for the Australian content and data streaming pioneers Aura, I'd like you to meet my guest this week, Lee Radbourne. So this is the Possibility Club, and we're talking practical bravery, and I'm Richard Freeman, and by now you know the drill. I am joined by a brilliant guest, an expert from their field, a representative of a company rolling its sleeves up to change, disrupt, get stuff done, ask big questions, and have a little bit of curiosity about what the future might hold if we did things a little bit differently. And today, our focus will be on streaming and the technology that is enabling us, wherever we are in the world, to access multimedia content at frighteningly fast speeds when we want it, where we want it, on whatever device. And frankly, it's spinning my head. Lee Radbourne, you're my guest today, and it's a delight to have you here. How the devil are you?
Thank you. I'm very well, Richard. Very, very kind introduction. So yeah, no, that's very, very sweet of you.
I think there's not much you don't know about streaming, so I'm keen to get into the nuts and bolts of where that's going as a sort of technology and a platform. I guess at one end of the spectrum, nice to be able to watch Ted Lasso at 2 a.m. on a tiny, tiny screen. At the other end of the spectrum, it's enabling people all around the world to be able to do super fast connectivity at the touch of a button at ever increasing speeds, and that has huge implications and potential for who we are and what we do. So maybe let's start with what got you into this.
I kind of fell into it. I think like most people fall into jobs. I fell into streaming. I've been in tech for, I think, about 17 years now, on and off. I started my career off in sales, moved into project management, and got started working for a company called Massive Interactive. and working on DAZN. So when DAZN was a tiny sports application that no one had ever heard of, it just literally launched in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. I think about over 7 years ago now. And yeah, that got me the bug. I think I've always had a passion for technology and streaming. Well, as it's grown exponentially, as we all know, what I love about what I do and what the industry is doing is it's changing the way people connect. I think historically, you probably like myself, you had to wait for a certain time for a TV show to come on and run to the toilet when the ad breaks on with your brother or sister shouting, "It's on." Whereas we
4 channels, Lee. 4 channels.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's it. The world has changed, our habits, the way that we consume content. And for me, it's all about making deeper emotional connections. Those are relationships that we build with the people or the sports team or the player that you love and support and want to know more about. And the way that, with social media and other platforms, it's how can you bring all that into one environment that makes it easier for those things to happen and to make the world a happier place, because ultimately there's a lot of challenges in the world and horrible situations. And, by having entertainment and bringing people together who are generally passionate about whether it's a sport or a TV show, it's a great feeling to be able to help enable that and to drive that change in the industry.
I'm of the generation as are you. I think of the sort of before and the after. Before the internet was a ubiquitous thing, and now when there's probably not an hour of my life in which the internet is not interacting directly with something I'm doing or thinking or monitoring or sharing or whatever. Is that good or badly?
Oh, do you know what? It's a very good point, because back in our day, I should say, when we had to record your own mixtapes off the stereo and you try and miss the DJ. I think there's an element of loss of, waiting and that anticipation of something. I think that's where you notice things like, the Mandalorian, for example, on Disney Plus is released on a schedule now, almost like a linear
schedule.
Yeah.
You've got 7 days to wait for the next episode. What are you talking about?
Exactly. Madness. What do you mean I can't just binge it over a weekend like I normally do? And I think that's good. In some ways that's a shame we lost it, but I think we're getting that in other ways. And I think the instant gratification comes more from an expectation. I guess for like your kids would probably say, well, it's just there. They have no concept of apart from maybe a phone or a TV, they have no concept of what a device is or what a video recorder is, or even even if I take into technology, what a server is. My favorite anecdote is, one that I keep seeing is, you ever seen kids trying to describe what the save button is, and you actually physically tell them that was used to be like a 3.5-inch floppy disk. Mm-hmm. That was a physical piece of thing that we had to put in.
All of the icons are completely out of date. Voicemail is a little reel-to-reel, an email is an envelope. These are pointless icons.
Exactly, and I think it's funny. How would you redesign a save icon for the modern generation? I'd love to see that design. But I think, that instant gratification, it is there. And I think it allows you to do stuff with your community or with your family or with your friends. Whereas before you had to travel or, yes, there's normally a cost associated to streaming or something else. You had to go around and get this. But now you can do that. Now you can make engaging environments. If you are a person who is alone and you want to feel part of the community, you can go on to, I wouldn't maybe recommend Twitter, but you could probably, it's a bit toxic sometimes, but, you can go onto fan forums, you can go on this stuff, you can go onto gaming, there's all this messaging, you can feel part of it. I think the thing that's kind of ruined it a bit is kind of this instant gratification and now the dopamine effect of likes and chasing that fame and chasing things. But if you take away that side of it, the true what it's all about, which is about building emotional connections and really spending quality time with the things that you love doing or watching the people you love seeing or just having that moment. That's what it's about. And I think that's what ultimately streaming helps deliver. And I think the next stage of that is being able to do that all in one place. It's all so disjointed at the moment. You want to watch something where you watch it on one device and you want, say it's live sports and you want some stats, well, it's on another device. And if you want to hear what people are thinking, you have to go on into Twitter and you have to do this. How can you bring that all together? And how can you do it in a way that's personalized for you, as in your screen or the way that you look at the app is completely different than the way that I look at the app, because it's tailored to my needs, because maybe you're deeper into a certain sport than I am. I'm more of a casual fan, or vice versa. And it's how can we create those immersive, engaging, interactive experiences in that sort of single view, whilst also think of the future, because, I think there was an announcement, Apple already positioning it as this next, sort of next big Apple event is all going to be about, beyond the phone. So, the mixed reality and the AR and the VR, and, it will happen. It may not be the first iteration that comes out this year, but it will be the second ones. The company I work for is looking at is how can we build for the future? And, how can we make sure that we are building these safe places where people can, like your kids, you probably saw it, the TikTok got fined nearly £13 million yesterday.
Really?
Because they're just harvesting all these kids' data, and you want to be, as I guess as a parent, that's a worrying thing, because all their friends are on TikTok, and how do you stop them?
I'm smugly vindicated when I announced to my daughter, hey, look, this is why I didn't let you go on TikTok. Aren't I the great parent? And she's like, I couldn't care less. From her perspective, she's missing out on something.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not worked as a piece of digital literacy there. Got some work to do. But, some really interesting points you raised there. And I think, but you raised a point there about social impact, and that's a very clear lens that we look at on this podcast, particularly thinking about the kind of responsibility of those that are engineering and designing this technology to be, I guess, a couple of steps ahead of what the consequences might be. Seeing all the big tech organizations write the letter about AI the other day, saying, can we pause some of this AI development because it's moving faster than the ethical frameworks can keep up with. Now, I'm cynical about some of the reasons for those signatories putting their pen onto that letter, because it seems like an uncharacteristic level of caution. But there is a principle there of thinking, how do we ensure that this hugely powerful force is equally commercially driven and for the good of the human race? 40% of the world are not online, let alone watching Succession and tuning into their favorite sports. So we're still not a digitally equal world. It's going to be quite a long time before most of the world gets the speeds of internet that will enable what we're talking about.
I think yes and no. It depends on the technology, and I think technology is catching up. 5G will enable connectivity in places where people didn't do it. You've really got Starlink, Elon Musk Starlink, Amazon have their own AWS equivalent of satellite infrastructure, and I think the connectivity is there. Like you said, that accessibility for, other parts of the world who maybe aren't as well connected. I think you'd be surprised actually, like at places like Africa are very well connected. And in some ways, they're actually ahead of us in terms of the way that they utilize technology, whether that's mobile payments, whether that's shopping, whether that's, doing that. And I think we have maybe in a Western society, we have a very Western view of what technology looks like and how accessible things are. But I do think, to your point, the way we make things more accessible and the way we think about our social impact on the world is around, making sure we're using the most technology in the right way that is the lowest bandwidth possible to make sure it's accessible. As always, the more stuff we add to technology and to streaming, the greater amount of data that you need to transfer, and the more then that puts on bandwidth and infrastructure around the world. But I do think there is that social impact. And I do think, going back to the AI the topic, it's around, the data that we have, and the models are all built on the internet, right? So, and if we look at the internet, we don't have an agreed version of what a fact is. And we've lost that, over the last few years. And, we've had a chat before and we've previously talked about this, but if you don't have a point of reference on what we all can universally agree on is a fact, then we have no basis to base our models on. So this is where we have to be conscious of those bias and stuff. And again, I think I've used that Jurassic Park reference before to you, which you're so predominated and focused on that you never stop to think if we should. But I think it's sensible to take a pause sometimes, on technology. But I think it's just one small thing that's going to change the way that we deliver stuff and make things more personalized. And again, that comes down to your data choice and your data rights. I think we already have some good place. The policy, GDPR, whether people like it or not, is actually a good policy. It does protect you as a user. It does protect your data. It's ultimately what's protected your daughter. She's not on TikTok. It would have protected her from being on TikTok. But I also think the younger generation, they know the value of their data. So if there's an incentive for them and it's in their interest, then they're quite happy to share their data. The reason your daughter doesn't care is because all her friends are on TikTok, and she might not understand the impact. But if there was a safe way of doing that and going, look, we are using your data and this is what we're doing it for, and these are the ways we're going to use it, people would feel more control, and then you would get more personalized, and then you could use the great things like AI to then give you an even more personalized, tailored experience to make sure you are connected to the things that you are interested in, into the communities that you want to speak to, and also have a safe way of navigating around that. Obviously the biggest issue with all of this is it's all based, if it's based on the internet, there's a lot of, unfortunately, racism and bias and division across the broad thing, fake news and all sorts. So how it goes back to the point again, how do we define it? If we can all agree universally what a fact is, then this would speed up that process a lot easier.
Absolutely right. And I mean, there's two things I think at the core of what you've just been saying there, and these are two quite wicked problems. I think one is around objectivity and facts. And that's easy to do, I think, when it comes to the raw technology. We've probably got some pretty key universal definitions now around the kind of what the technology is, what a certain, we've probably got some agreed terms around the size of something, some processes, more than we've ever had before. But when it comes to social, facts are inherently difficult because you have biases you have cultural things, you have the definition of inclusion in one society is going to be different to that in another. That's always going to be inherently difficult when you're looking at a kind of universal globalized language or system, which links to my other point, which is around kind of ownership. The biggest driver of innovation and of the rapid pace of technological change that we've been in is because rich individuals have invested in it. There's no two ways about that. It's not been governments or states. Maybe some of the early seed technology, often with military and defense, is where that's where GPS and stuff all kind of started, and then it becomes a technology transfer into the hands of the private sector.
It's difficult, isn't it? Right, because ultimately, whether we like it or not, commercialism and capitalism is the markets of choice at the moment, and that's how we make our money, and there is value in the data. I think people using your data in a way that is valuable to you, so it's mutually beneficial. So if you give me your data and you tell me what your favorites are, for example, then I will show you stuff that's more relevant to you, and as that gets better and more personalized, it won't just be your favorite. Just because you like this streaming show means you're also like this streaming show, also be, well, actually you're like this affiliated content and you're actually maybe interested in this topic. But I think we've also got to get that, what that discoverability, have a bit more wild cards and kind of make sure you don't get thrown. I think a lot of the challenges these days, maybe why we got to where we are with some of this extreme views, is because you're just funneled down echo chambers, and that's, you take, for example, then if you take Facebook, it does just funnel you down an echo chamber. I mean, Google used to have a policy, right, not to be evil, was one of their core company values. That suddenly disappeared a number of years ago. I think it's not necessarily, we're going to, I'd like to think that we are going to be the ones who lead that next sort of industrial revolution in technology, that next way of connecting people and the next way of consuming and the next way of doing things. But ultimately, it's not going to be decided by us. It's going to be decided by your daughter. It's going to be decided
her daughter, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. And they're the ones who are going to be the ones to decide it. And I think they're a lot more, if you read any studies around Gen Z and etc., they're a lot more ethical. They're a lot more socially conscious, diverse, inclusive than any generation before them. And I think potentially we're in safe hands. It's a risk, right? But potentially we could be.
I mean, yes, you're right, but also I'm wary of that as a sort of blanket narrative that almost becomes the get out of jail free card for current decision makers. Like, we're in safe hands with the next generation. They're going to be, well, actually, then what are we doing?
We're the ones at the moment who are going, right, based on the knowledge and stuff that the mistakes or learnings that we've made in the past, like, We're a lot more awake to what technology does and the potentials and powers of technology. But I think it's for us to, I like to think that we're going to be writing the guidelines, because technology, the technology that we think about now, and the way that we interact with technology now, with social media and streaming and other platforms, is not the way that we're going to be engaging it within the next 2 years, let alone the next 5 years. And because of that, people, hopefully like people like myself and others, will write the guidelines on what is the right way of doing it. Because ultimately, we do have a social impact. We do have a responsibility. And whilst, I say we're in safe hands, we're in safe hands because I'd like to think that they're in safe hands, knowing that the guidelines we're going to put in place, there'll be things that change and we're evolve and we'll make learnings, and everyone will. But knowing that they will have the conscience to keep us honest, like they do on climate change. They're the ones driving climate change, for example.
This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible. But who are we?
Always Possible works with ambitious businesses, charities, and public services that are thinking about what's next.
From architects to aerospace companies, puppet theatres to primary schools, business networks to big data analysts.
If you're wanting to be brave with some big decisions, or to be clearer about what to prioritise, then an award-winning workshop from the Always Possible team is a brilliant starting point.
We care about just one thing: building ideas that work.
For creative, intuitive, and practical expertise, consider Always Possible as your strategic partner. Find out more about how we could power up your mission. Visit alwayspossible.co.uk.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
What really interests me at the moment, then, and it feels like we're kind of going through some phases, there are some different motivations because pure shareholder capitalism has not worked. The banks have still failed and needed to be bailed out. Some of the biggest businesses in the world have collapsed. It's made the world richer, but it's also made inequality more stark. It's depleted resources from a kind of academic perspective. But there's some interesting models and frameworks. I guess I'm only now starting to see what that means in a business environment, because I think one of the bravest things that certainly big, growing, capitalized businesses, the real bravery is to say, we're going to do that, but we're going to do that whilst also regulating ourselves beyond what's legally compliant. We're going to be investing in our social impact modeling. We are going to look at our responsibilities around environment and around welfare and well-being and understanding the impact of our products and services. And we're going to take that as seriously as our commercial growth.
I think it's essential. I think to be in business now, you'll see a lot more, I think, over the next few years around people, be reporting on their social impact and on their environmental impact. And it will become legislated eventually. But I think you're right. I think people expect that. I think the audience, we like to think that we are leading edge, we're bleeding edge. We're going to change the world of streaming. And to do that, we're targeting a generation who consumes content differently to any other generation that's done that, Generation Z and people, I guess daughter and probably a bit older. They care. They genuinely care about how you do it. And I think also we genuinely care. I think you've got to be, you call it brave, but I think it's just called it, just honest and just being true to your core values. I like to think that, I know there's still, I'm going to hesitate to call them, but I'm going to call them anyway. There's dinosaurs out there, right? I work in tech industry. I know there's a lot of dinosaurs out there who are set in their ways, who their goal is to make as much money as possible, and they don't care how they do it. There's also people coming through who are now bursting into senior roles or executive roles like myself, who have come through that, who've seen you, like you, are in this kind of middle ground. We grew up with before the internet. We grew up without mobile phones. We've seen the world change more than anyone else in any lifetime. And we know what's important to us. And I think there's a general consensus that that's just what good business looks like now. And I think, you have to be conscious of your social impact and how are you going to give back? And how are you going to make sure that it's almost like, what would I want as a consumer? What are my minimum expectations as a consumer? And that's where I want to do business. And I think social impact, environmental impact, data protection, but also I think people are getting wise to that as well, by the way. I think, generally, obviously people still do fall into those traps, but I think people are getting wiser to those sorts of things. And I think that's why it's important as a company to really, all those points you made around standing up and standing strong and being putting your head against the game is, in my opinion, a minimum expectation of any business that I'd want to work with.
It's definitely not most businesses. We're still under half, I think, that are anywhere close to this kind of idea of a kind of ethical framework. Since the Second World War, arguably since the Industrial Revolution, we have got an economy built on owners getting rich, workers being productive for the gain of those owners, for natural or any other resources being entirely exploitable so that products and services can be sold at scale. And we're challenging that in many ways, but still it feels there's still something more that needs to come to full-throatedly take that apart.
I think that you're right. I agree that, there's, maybe I'm ahead of the curve. I like to think maybe I'm ahead of the curve then, but I agree with you that there's a lot, we're nowhere near 50% of businesses doing that. But the thing that's going to drive it is consumers, right? As all our lives are getting harder, we talk, we may have a little bit of disposable income, but there are people out there who don't have disposable income, right? But they're the ones, consumers are going to be the ones that choose the brands and the products and services that align with their core values and what.
But the data shows they're not doing it yet, or that there is a move towards it. And when you survey people and say, what's important to you when you're choosing a brand, they'll say absolutely provenance, sustainability, ethics. But the reality, when you're then in the supermarket, or then you've got the choice between the expensive local artisan whatever or the cheap one, people are still taking the cheap one, and a lot of that is because the economic conditions mean that you have few choices to do so. And also, let's understand greed and a kind of idea of hanging on to convenience and comfort that we have been sold intensively over the last 40 years is always going to be a reason why people choose what they choose.
Well, I think the issue, particularly in streaming, the reason maybe why it's not widespread change in streaming just yet is because content is king, right? So it depends on where if you want to watch Mandalorian, you can only watch on Netflix. Sports are a great example for this. Sports rights, Premier League rights go for billions and billions of dollars, and you can only watch them on a certain platform. Yeah. But until a rights holder, when they are selling their rights, or a independent, let's say, content maker, maybe not Disney, but an independent studio is selling their rights to a Netflix or to a Sky or to whoever, until they go, well, as part of what we're looking at doing is looking at your social credentials and your green impact and how do you make a positive impact on the world as a whole, then that's going to drive the change. But I think that what people like myself can do is work with those companies, whether it's media companies or working with sports rights holders, providing the vision of a company with a clear social impact, a clearer environmental thing. Ultimately, we want to make the greenest streaming platform possible. I'd love to get to a point where we can make a carbon neutral streaming platform. It's a big, ambitious goal. It will take time. But then if that encourages then those people to come on board, and then suddenly others in the industry are going to suddenly go, well, hang on a sec, unless we do that, we're not going to get the deals or get the clients that we need to do. And I think that's the impact that we can have. And that's what drives it. Like you said, it's not in certain circumstances, in certain industries like food or, certain consumer elements where you don't have a choice because you can't afford to. I think, the thing that people do have a choice now is which streaming, which content they want to consume. The trouble is they can't choose which platform it's supposed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I'm absolutely
we're all guilty of it, right?
I used to, thinking back when we just said about, only having 4 channels once upon a time. So I've gone in my lifetime from, 10 years ago, just paying a TV license for 30 quid a month. I now pay a TV license and probably about another 40 quid's worth of streaming platforms, probably more than that. It's absurd.
It is, I know the feeling.
And it's just like, well, how has that happened? And what am I demanding for it, actually? What, as a consumer, why am I not saying I'm going to withhold that until you can prove to me that you're not polluting, that you're not just trying to play to base kind of common denominator behaviours?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we're all the same. I'm the same. I consume probably way more streaming content than I should admit to.
Well, you're in that business.
Yeah, at least that's my excuse.
Where are we going to be in this kind of disruptive life cycle between now and when it becomes a compliance issue?
I think, well, I'm lucky that I work for Aura, where they've always been, I always think of them, even before I joined them, I always thought of them as like, what people were doing in terms of streaming was like 1.2.0, and this was, I hate it first, Web 3.0, but it's not Web 3.0. This just the way they approach immersive experiences and unique, joyful experience was always way ahead of anyone else in the market. And they've always been like that. And that's one of the reasons I joined them. And I think with the team that we've got and the brains that we have available, and that's what we're doing, is how can we create that, utilizing the great experiences that we've got and immersive and all those things we talked about at the beginning of this, beginning of the show, which was around how can we create those communities and everything on a single device. We're there. I also am an advisor on an advisory board member for a company called Moby, where they do sub 1 second latency, and it's magic. It's literally like watching magic. But I think with the companies that I work with and advise to, we are in the best position to make these differences. I think I might have told you this stat before, but in October 21, Netflix reported that their fans clocked up more than 6 hours watching up to 10 shows, in the first 28 days of their release. So things like Stranger Things. So it's 6 billion hours of watching their top 10 shows. Those 6 billion hours equates to roughly 1.13 billion miles, which is the equivalent of going from Earth to Saturn. That's 1 month's top 10 shows on Netflix alone.
In terms of the emissions of the
CO2 emissions that are done. These are things you can find out. These are all publicly available data that you get from from the European carbon emission studies that have been out there. And I think that's the point, is that we do need to do this. There's efficient, we're still, a lot of these data centers are still on old technology. The way that content is produced, as in from getting it from venue to actually your platform, is using a lot of old tech and a lot of, a lot of people and vans and old technology. But I also think there's newer streaming protocols now, like AV1, which is 30% more efficient, uses 30% less bandwidth. So these are the sorts of things that we're looking at using and implementing as part of our strategy. And obviously people like Moby do things completely different to the way that the industry is trying to do it. And also Aura is best positioned because we are a bleeding edge platform built on the latest, greatest technology. We're built on a gaming engine. So that's completely different way to how traditional streaming platforms approach streaming. And that's why we can offer different, unique experiences rather than that standard same Netflix, same Amazon Prime, same view. Yeah. So I think it's having the right people, it's having the desire, it's having the technology to be able to do that and be bold. And I think we are bold, ambitious companies that will drive change. And I think it's a very ambitious goal to get there, but I think it's an essential goal. I think it's just an essential goal that that we have to do as our lives change, and that we talked at the beginning of the show, as we consume more and everything's instantly available, then it's our obligation, I think, as people like myself and people like yourself, to kind of make sure that we put these changes in place, because government's not going to do it. We're the ones who are going to have to do it, and like I said, if you go back, the money will follow. So if we do it in the right way and it makes it and actually still produce the most amazing experiences that no one's ever seen before, and thinking about the future like we are, about mixed reality and AR and VR and how that's going to, the next generation of consuming content is going to be, then ultimately, hopefully, then when we speak to these big rights holders or media companies, and they go, well, actually, not only is this the great platform that does all the great things we need to do, it's also the greenest platform, and it's actually ultimately carbon neutral is the ultimate dream that we can get to, and I think that will then drive the change. Unfortunately, with all these things take time, don't they? And I think we have a keen, we've got a keen strategy to drive these forwards. I mean, I can't share too much at this point, but I hope at a later date, when maybe in a year's time or maybe 6 months' time, we can have a catch up again, and I can give a bit more information where we're on that journey.
Definitely. I've got two questions. One's a quick one, and one's a bit more complex. You said sub 1 second latency is like magic. For any non-streaming aficionados, what does that mean?
What does that mean? So latency is the time it takes for an event to happen physically, whether it's on, let's say, a football pitch. So someone scores a goal, to when you physically see it on a device. So whether that's on your TV or mobile. I mean, I've still got this memory. I think it was the 2018 World Cup. I was in the pub, couldn't get downstairs to the screen, went to the bar's 5 deep, and I was watching the football on my phone on iPlayer, and I heard the goal go in. I heard everyone cheering, the beers going everywhere. And 30 seconds later, while I stood at the bar, that's when I physically saw the goal happen. And that's what we talk about. I mean, that's latency between one type of consumption via terrestrial TV versus a mobile device. Ultimately, sub 1 second latency means that you're basically watching it in real time, in high definition. And I think this is the next level, right? This is like, waiting, buffering, and all this stuff. And being able to do stuff in real time means that you can do a lot more. It has massive implications on immersive experiences, interactive experiences, not seeing, I know historically there's been a lot of NFL fans in certain countries when a streaming platform has taken over, where they were complaining on Twitter because they were getting Twitter updates before they actually watched it. So to be able to see something in real time is changing the game and changes the way that we can consume content and be part of that match day experience. You're now getting the same experience as someone in the stadium, which also has wider implications on the betting industry, for example. To be able to true real-time in-play betting, whatever your position on betting is, it does enable that. It enables, all just fun, immersive polls or gaming, free-to-play games. It doesn't have to be betting. So this is game-changing for the industry, and I think it's something that's really going to make a difference to the way that we consume content and what it means in terms of the graphics and overlays and all the other cool immersive stuff that we can put onto streaming as well.
Thank you very much. That was the short question. The second is, what do you want to be famous for, Lee?
I want to change the world of streaming. That's what I want to be famous for. And then and when I say famous, I want to be industry famous. I want to be famous like a celebrity. Sure.
You've just gone past your 300th birthday. I'm sure that's where the healthcare technology is going. And you decide to go into voluntary suspended animation or whatever we're doing by then. And, people gather to say, right, okay, we won't have Lee in our lives for a bit. This is what he did. This is what he changed. This is who he was.
Yeah, that is for me is Lee. I won't say Lee changed the world of streaming, and he did that by making it easier for people to make emotional connections. And not only that, he also had the environmental impact because he made a carbon neutral streaming platform. That's what I want to be remembered for. I want to be able to turn around and say, do you know what? It's a positive impact on the world. For me, it's about making emotional connections and making change and making nice changes to people. And I think that if I could get remembered for even a small percentage of that would be a big success for me.
Thanks so much, Lee. Really good to chat with you. I've learnt lots. Need to be more conscious about what's going on in the technology of streaming rather than just blindly consuming. But it's exciting. But yeah, thanks for being on the Possibility Club.
Well, thank you very much. And hopefully you can continue to blindly consume and not have to worry about it. So that's something we can all joke about. But yes, great. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Possibility Club Practical Bravery. If you enjoyed this episode, do like, share, review, tell everybody about it. Look in the show notes for all the details of today's guest, stuff we talked about, stuff that's of interest, new things to read, new things to listen to. And if you are running a business or a charity and you are trying to accelerate or improve the impact that you have in the world, if you want to be famous for what you do and what you change rather than just what you sell, then talk to us. alwayspossible.co.uk. We want to hear from you, we want to talk to you, we want to amplify and elevate your ideas, and who knows, we might be able to help you feel more confident and clear about what's next. alwayspossible.co.uk. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new special guest and a new insight on practical bravery in action.
The Possibility Club is an Always Possible podcast. The interviewer was Richard Freeman for Always Possible, and the producer and editor was me, Chris Thorpe Tracy, for Lo-Fi Arts. Have a good week.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
Lo-Fi